Kangaroo Airways Flight 377, Chapter 2, Dreadful Fighter Parts, 16th of May, 2018. Death stalked Lu Wei with wide titanium wings. His heart pounded in his chest as he desperately rolled his fighter jet in an attempt to lose the pursuing Taiwanese pilot. He feared that the attempt was futile, but still he had to try. Behind him, his co-pilot, Zhang Wei, was limp and lifeless, still suspended upright, but already dead due to a round which had pierced his liver only moments earlier. How long would it be before Lu Wei met a similar fate? Or was worse still in store for him? He knew that in addition to being able to fire over 1,000 bullets in under a minute, the latest model of the Taiwanese IDF jet fighter was capable of launching short-range missiles. If they were able to gain a lock on him, it was all over. As if they were both two dancers in a part of some skybound battling ballet, both planes twirled and tumbled, diving through the clouds. No matter what maneuver Lu Wei attempted, it seemed like the Taiwanese pilot was right there with him, determined to never be upstaged. Just who was the Taiwanese pilot? Lu Wei had prided himself on being the best, but his opponent was on another level entirely. Was the Grim Reaper himself really piloting the Taiwanese plane, or some other monster born from Lu Wei's darkest dreams? Now believing that there was no other option, Lu Wei hit his fist down hard on the release catch for his ejector seat. Nothing happened. He tried again, harder still. Nothing. Again. Panic began to set in. It had seemed that this was his final shot at survival, and that small flicker of hope was fading fast. Closing his eyes for a moment, he thought of those who were most precious to him, who would be left behind to mourn for him in China after he died. His best friend, his wife, his daughter. Goodbye, my beloved. I am so sorry, Zhao. My love. Waste time with a masterpiece. Don't waste time with a masterpiece. You should be rolling with me. You should be rolling with me. Ah, you're a real-life fantasy. You're a real-life fantasy. But you're moving so carefully. Let's start living dangerously. As Gemma Adams loudly listened to Cake by the Ocean on her iPod, she was thankful that her boyfriend Todd had been thoughtful enough to put together this track list for her prior to the flight. She was also glad that she had thought to bring her own headphones. The cheap pair provided by Kangaroo Airways sucked. Gemma had been happily dancing in her seat for around 20 minutes now, writhing her upper body from side to side in time to the music. Far from annoying the stranger sat in the seat next to her, it was arousing him. So much that Gemma felt sure that at least her neighbour was now semi-erect. She decided that this was at least a preferable situation to him belittling her and telling her to sit still. If she didn't already have a boyfriend, she may even have asked him out. He was kind of cute. Gemma's relaxing routine was disturbed by the sound of someone shouting in the row opposite her. She removed her headphones to see what was happening. Listen, please. You have to listen to me. We're all in trouble. A British lady who had been sat in the row opposite Gemma was now standing in the middle of the aisle and yelling down the plane. Please, sit down, asked an air stewardess. Perhaps the air stewardess was more accurate. After all, Gemma hadn't seen any other air stewardesses on this flight. No, you can't. You have to listen to me. I just heard on the news. We're not safe. Taiwan. China, we're going to... Before the British woman could finish her sentence, the air stewardess, Chloe, slapped her hard across the face, causing the woman's glasses to fall to the floor. Chloe had observed that people sometimes resort to slapping when someone was being hysterical, and she had thought that Georgina was getting hysterical. She had certainly been highly emotional anyway, which was close enough. Ouch, that sure showed her, thought Gemma. I asked you to sit down, Chloe shouted sternly. Trembling, the British lady did just as she was told. the seatbelt light went on. Once more, Captain John Fiddler's voice could be heard coming through the overhead speakers. "Attention, please. Attention. We're experiencing some turbulence. So at this moment, please stow all tables and turn off all electronic devices. This includes all in-flight entertainment, which will now be disconnected. Sorry, folks, you'll have to watch Home and Away later. Chloe Markham, please come to the cockpit immediately. Thanks." Smiling, Chloe turned to the terrified Brit and said, "There, now the news won't be able to disturb you anymore." When Chloe had gone, Georgina picked her glasses up from the floor and put them on again. They were now crooked, but that was the least of her problems. She had briefly seen a news announcement about a conflict going on above the East China Sea right now between China and Taiwan. They were not meant to be flying in this airspace. It wasn't safe here. How could she make people listen? Lu Wei had now accepted that there was no escaping death. Tears trickled down his cheeks. He had said his last goodbye, and now believed it was not a matter of if, but just when, the end would come. On his radar, Lu Wei detected another plane nearby. What? Another fighter? No, not another fighter. A passenger plane. What were they doing? Still, their folly may yet mean that he would be spared after all. If Lu Wei flew close enough to them, then perhaps the Taiwanese pilot wouldn't risk firing a missile at him, for fear of harming the passenger plane. It was cowardly, Lu knew, but he did not want to die. "Please, forgive me, Zhao. What I do now, I do for you, and for our daughter." He flew his jet fighter closer to the passenger plane, hoping that it might shield him from the death which was coming closer all the time. Closer, closer. "What the hell's happening back there, Chloe?" John asked her. He gestures to his security camera monitor and says, "I just saw you slap a passenger. You need to get a grip. What's going on?" Damn. Only last year security cameras wouldn't have been allowed in the passenger area due to a flight rule to protect passengers' privacy. This rule had been repealed at the beginning of 2018 due to suggestions that having security cameras would help to prevent passenger planes from being hijacked. It was still a grey area, with some airlines opting to fit a camera, as others deciding against it. Kangaroo Airways had been one of the first airlines to fit security cameras. Terrorists 1, privacy 0. Chloe longed for the good old days where she would have been able to do whatever she liked in the passenger area without being observed by the pilots. On the bright side, at least there was no sound on the security camera, so Chloe still had the option to be creative with the truth. "It's nothing, just some Brit getting the other passengers riled up. Some bullshit she saw on the news about us flying through a war zone. Fake news, right?" There was an uncomfortably long pause. Well, it was uncomfortable for Colin and John anyway. Chloe was too inhuman to either feel comfortable or uncomfortable. Chloe was very used to being the calmest person in the room, and so it was Chloe who finally decided to break the silence. "Right, Colin?" "No, it's true. Well, sort of. Our planned route was supposed to just about skirt around the edges of a tense political situation, which soon escalated and became an outright conflict between Taiwan and China. Well, the problem is, there's been reports that the lines have shifted, with a few fighter jets from both sides flying close by." "Just how close, Colin? How much danger are we in here?" asked Chloe. Nobody needed to orally answer her, as it was at that moment that a lone jet fighter zoomed dangerous close above them. "Fuck," Chloe swore. "Fuck just about covers it," John agreed. "So you need to head back there right now, stay with the passengers, and do your best to convince them that everything's fine, even though we know we're in the shit. Can you manage that, Chloe?" Harpreet Singh heard the sound of another plane passing nearby, and he feared the worst. He had been watching the news too. He knew why the British woman had become so panicked, They were flying through what had effectively become a war zone. Something had gone horribly wrong, and they were all in a whole world of danger. He thought back to what he had heard on the news and wished he had a photographic memory. What little he remembered was that the situation was described as political unrest between Taiwan and China by the news reporter. China banning planes to Taiwan, Taiwan banning planes to China, both threatening to use force against the other. Then, the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs had been asked for a comment, only to reply with the same dull reply of, "We strongly support the One China policy. We are concerned about the current situation and hope for a peaceful outcome soon." The British woman had tried to warn everyone about the danger and had paid the price for doing so. Harpeet decided that the best course of action instead was to just look out for himself. As soon as the air stewardess Chloe had entered the cockpit and closed the door behind her, Harpeet removed his seatbelt. Click. Outside the plane, thunder began to rumble. Harpeet tried not to view it as a bad omen, but it certainly wasn't comforting. Now, where did they stow the parachutes? Lu Wei was now close enough to the passenger plane to be able to plainly see it outside his window. He had done it. At this proximity to a civilian craft, it would be far too dangerous for the Taiwanese pilot to take the shot. He might survive. Was it that the Taiwanese pilot pursuing Lu Wei hadn't noticed the passenger plane? Was it that he had simply thought he still had time to shoot Lu Wei down without harming the passenger plane? Or did he just not care one way or the other? Lu Wei would never know the answers to these questions. All that he did know was pain, fire, and death, which lasted for but a second before his life was snuffed out. The missile which he had feared coming for the last few minutes of his life finally had, and it had taken but seconds to reach a small jet fighter craft and destroy it completely. All that remain are scraps of metal, some stained by gory lumps of bloody flesh which were formerly Lu Wei and his co-pilot, Zhang. The scraps were scattered far and wide by the force of the blast. These dreadful fighter parts were now red-hot weapons, and one such weapon found itself sent on a tragic trajectory towards Kangaroo Airways Flight 377. Even had Lu Wei been alive and ordered to aim at Kangaroo Airways Flight 377's main engine, he may not have managed to pull off such a shot, partly as the instinct to spare the innocent lives may have caused him to subconsciously aim wider than was necessary. The dreadful fighter parts knew no such mercy. Perhaps aided by the wind which buffeted against them, a piece of the remains of Lu Wei's fighter plane, a particularly persistent piece of the fighter plane, found its way inside Kangaroo Airways Flight 377's rightmost jet engine. There was a whir, a grinding sound, and then a small explosion. A jet of flame burst out from the front of the jet engine, only to be extinguished moments later. Kangaroo Airways Flight 377's main engine was no longer operational. The last thing that Harpeet thought before he died was, "I've got to get the hell off this plane. We're all in terrible danger. I've just got to. Where are those parachutes?" Had he listened to the safety announcement more carefully upon boarding, or had Chloe Markham done a better job of delivering the safety announcement, then he would have been aware that there were no parachutes aboard Kangaroo Airways Flight 377. Unfortunately, he had been too frustrated at the time, due to being racially abused in the airport minutes before boarding, and was not really focused on what Chloe had said. This had been Harpeet's first time aboard a plane as an adult, his first and his last. Harpeet was then thrown to the side of the plane, smashing his head against the window. Harpeet's head fared worse than the window, which was made of tempered glass. Harpeet's head was more fragile, and it burst open, causing blood to drop onto the lap of the unfortunate passenger which Harpeet's corpse had landed on. She screamed. She was not the only one. Panic echoed throughout the plane, partly due to the plane being momentarily sent careening to one side, and partly due to Harpeet's sudden and very bloody demise. Georgina managed to stifle her own scream, although it was touch and go for a moment. Looking up, she saw that the seatbelt light was on. She wished that Harpeet had heeded the advice. More than that, though, she wished she'd never boarded this fucking plane in the first place. Back in the cockpit, John was turning the air blue. "Fuck a duck," was his latest expletive, as he fought to right the plane. He finally managed it, but not before adding some more choice words. "Shit a dick," being amongst them. "What just happened?" Chloe asked calmly. "Why the fuck are you still here? Go do your job," roared John. "The passengers are panicking back there, Chloe. You're the only air stewardess on this damned plane." Colin came rushing to Chloe's defense. He cared about her and didn't like John treating her that way. "Hey, don't be a drongo, John. Just answer the damn question." Shaking, John sighed deeply before finally replying, "Something hit us. We just lost our main engine. Flame out." "Something? What hit us? A bird?" asked Chloe. Colin laughed nervously. "If it was a bird, it's fucking fried now." John shook his head. "It can't be a bird, not at this altitude." "What does it matter? Colin, how's engine 2? Colin Begg looked down at his dashboard. "Engine 2 is still stable." John sighed with relief. "And fuel supply? Fuel's fine for now too." "Okay, great." "Wait!" Colin yelled. "We just lost engine 2. Flame out." Chloe was nowhere near as experienced as Colin or John in this area, but she knew enough to know that flame out wasn't good. It meant that the combustion engine had now been extinguished in both the main and the secondary engine. "So what do we do now?" she asked. Colin was the first to answer. "Now we have to land," he replied. "Land where, Colin? We're over the East China Sea in the middle of a storm," answered Chloe. As if to confirm her last point, the thunder rumbled again. It was as if the storm itself had ears. Was it the thunder's way of yelling at them or laughing at just how tragic their situation was now becoming? John was finding Chloe's calm tone of voice unnerving. Why the hell wasn't Chloe as panicked as he was? Glancing down at his dashboard momentarily, he saw some of the passengers screaming and what may even be a dead body. Oh God, John hoped that it wasn't a dead body. "Please, just be asleep, on top of a screaming woman," John thought, without truly having much hope that this would be the case. Chloe, you'd better get back there," he suggested, as forcefully as he could. Chloe briefly looked back towards the passenger area and then just shook her head, smiling. "No, thank you. I'm happier here." "Chloe, shit's going down back there. Go do your fucking job." "I said no, John. Please don't make me say it again." John decided that Chloe Markham wasn't just calm. There was a steel to her voice which right now made her terrifying. And just what had gone on between Colin and Chloe? He seemed extremely defensive of her. In that moment, John felt sure that if Chloe had asked Colin to punch him in the face, he'd do as he was told, like a good little puppy. Was he fucking her? It wasn't like John couldn't see why Colin would be attracted to Chloe. She was a young, beautiful woman. But wasn't Colin married? John had met Colin's wife. She was a nice lady. True, not as young and not as attractive as Chloe, but she was a hell of a lot nicer. Didn't nice count for anything these days? He liked nice. "Fuck. Fine. You're right, we're too far from land. The nearest airport is Taiwan. We wouldn't make it. That would have been Plan A, which would have been a fuckload better than the alternative." "Which means what? You don't mean?" asked Chloe. "It's time for Crisis Plan B. Damn it, I really hate Plan B." John found himself thinking about Kangaroo Airways' cheesy slogan, "Your dream flies through the skies." What the hell did that really mean anyway? Whoever was having this dream, John hoped they'd wake the hell up soon. Crisis Plan B involved an emergency landing at sea. Landing on the East China Sea would be very risky, especially in the middle of a storm. It would be terrifying for everyone involved, Colin included. He also knew that the odds of anyone surviving a crash landing at sea in a storm, whilst mathematically possible, were still extremely slim. At this stage, though, what other option did they really have? With tears in her eyes, Gemma Adams reaches for a mobile phone. Her hands are shaking. She has never been this scared before in her life. Fumbling in her pockets, Gemma finally locates her mobile phone. She needs her boyfriend. She needs Todd. Gemma isn't sure whether it is so he can calm her down or just so that she can say goodbye. She hopes for the former, but fears that it's more likely the latter. Gemma dials his phone number and waits. All that she hears in reply is a deep bleeping tone. She checks her mobile phone. Out of service. No bars, no Todd, no hope. Gemma begins to whimper to herself, and the whimper soon evolves into a full wail. Why? Why the hell is this happening? I don't want to be here. I can't take it. Panicking, she tries to email Todd instead. There was no Wi-Fi coverage either. Gemma felt so alone. Gemma doesn't know whether to blame the storm, God, or just put it down to bad luck. Gemma closes her eyes and continues to sob. It is then that she feels someone softly squeezing her hand. She opens her eyes. Through the tears, she sees that the young man, how old is he, 18, 20, who has sat next to her, has now taken hold of her hand. Under normal circumstances, Gemma would object. She has been dating Todd for over 4 years now, and in that time, his hand has been the only one that she has held, the only touch that she has craved. Gemma wished that she had never boarded this plane. Why had she been so determined to go on this holiday by herself? She realized that it was selfish to wish that Todd was here with her. After all, she didn't want him to die with her. Instead, more than anything, Gemma wished that she was back in Australia with Todd, and that he was holding her close in his loving arms. But Gemma wasn't with Todd, and Todd wasn't here, and right here, right now, she needed this. Gemma needed someone to comfort her. Perhaps the stranger sat next to her needed this too. Gemma squeezed his hand back. God, she didn't even know his name. They'd been sat next to each other for hours, and she hadn't even asked. It was a bit late now, but still, Gemma thought that she would feel slightly better if she at least knew the name of the guy who'd been kind enough to comfort her. "You're going to be okay," he said. "We're going to be okay." Was he primarily trying to convince himself or Gemma that this was true, that they weren't about to die? From his accent, Gemma guessed that he was from New Zealand. "Thank you. I hope you're right. My name's Gemma. What's your name?" Although he was clearly terrified too, he smiled at her warmly. "My name's Todd." Huh? He was named Todd too? It's a small world after all. Outside, the thunder roared and lightning flashed. Kangaroo Airways Flight 377 began its slow descent through the dark clouds towards the East China Sea below. The wild waves of the East China Sea reached their arms up high above them in anticipation of another meal. Its appetite was insatiable. Still, there were 52 passengers aboard Kangaroo Airways Flight 377. That would be quite a nice meal.